Welcome to the 3A Athletics Workshop Podcast. Deep dives through the journey of youth sports, what parents experience, what coaches experience, and most importantly, what your kids experience. We'll also feature the latest information, tips, tools, and resources to help parents, coaches, and athletes navigate and improve the culture of youth sports. And now, the 3A Athletics Workshop Podcast.
Welcome everybody back to the 3A Workshop Podcast. Joined here by my partner, Seth Taylor. Excited to get into episode number 9 regarding the ego, something all of us deal with as human beings. I think there's a lot of ways to define ego and its purpose, but let's start off, Seth. How do you define ego?
Yeah, ego is a really fascinating. I mean, this is where there's all kinds of different disciplines and different things, philosophy and theology and spirituality and psychology, and that define what it is. It's a very well-worn term, and I've had some psychologists say, well, let's just not use this term, it's used too much. And it's helpful. It is an actual thing. The ego, some would kind of equate it to like an entity of sorts, but it's a thinking machine. It's like a part of us. We think it's located in the frontal lobe, the part of us that does the storytelling and thinking. So it's the processor that actually tends to give construction and form to everything. But it does it through storytelling. So, most people, of course, operate. I actually call it an operating system. Most people operate from their ego most of the time. Right? The ego kind of defines everything and defines the world. And so, if you go back to, this is philosophy, if you go back to Descartes, when Descartes, 1700s, whatever, 1600s, he said, I think, therefore I am. So the first philosophers were kind of going, well, it seems like this thinking thing is me. Therefore, I know I exist in some way. But we've learned now that that's actually not true. Because we've realized that we can observe our thoughts, and if you can observe your thoughts, then you aren't your thoughts. But it seems to be generated by a part of you that we have come to call the ego. It's a thinking machine that gives definition to the world. Now, if you get into quantum physics and you get into some of that stuff, some people think the ego actually gives form to the entire third dimension, where matter and time and space are linear and solid. Because we know that even our bodies are mostly empty space made of this weird kind of energy. So what gives it form? Well, it seems like the ego in its kind of storytelling tends to give form to everything, but everything is narrative, everything is story on this kind of plane of existence. So yeah, it's a thinking machine located in your frontal lobe.
Yeah, you brought something up that I think is an important distinction, right? And I've learned this: you are not your thoughts. And we talked about it, Tony Robbins' podcast I listened to a while back that defines the mind, right, as something that has evolved over the last however many thousands of years that humans have been on Earth. And the operating system that we're referring to is not as advanced, right, as the technology and the world that we live in. There's way more information out there to be able to input, right, and download into your operating system. But that's one thing I think for parents listening is understanding, especially as you're teaching your kids, right? You're going to have negative thoughts. You're going to have positive thoughts. You're going to have good and bad and all the in-betweens. But being able to separate yourself from your thoughts and understand that that is a part of you, a system within you that is not just unique to you as a human. Every human being has that experience. Yeah.
Well, and the key, you hit it right there. The key with it, when we're talking about parents and the parents that listen, the key isn't to get your kids to think positive, negative, or any way. It's to get them to see and observe thought in general. If we can come to the point where we can observe the ego, what comes from that is what we call awareness. When we start to observe the ego, we can start to become aware. And then the more aware we are of it as a separate thing from us, the less power it has over us. And we'll get more into why we don't want the ego to have so much power.
Yeah, which again, next question is, do you think that ego helps or hurts athletes? And why?
I think for the most part, if you had to lean one way or the other, it actually is more harmful than it is good. The ego, the thing is, we need it. Actually, you need it to move your body, right? You need it to the thing, but especially for kids, just to kind of real quick sidetrack it. The ego, from what we kind of theorize at this point, is the ego is kind of born sometime in the first year of life. There's this phase that babies go through that they call the mirror phase. Sometime usually between 7 months and a year or so, where the baby starts to have a type of self-awareness come in. And it's like this, and you can tell because you can pass a newborn around the room. You know what I mean? Like, hey, you want to hold the baby? Yeah. We can all hold the baby. everybody can hold the baby because the baby doesn't have an ego yet. So the baby actually perceives itself as one with everything.
Yeah.
So, one person, and it's all just the baby.
Yeah.
It's just the oneness, right?
Yep.
And then the ego starts to come in and starts to see itself as separate from the world. And so that's when the baby starts experiencing what we would call separation anxiety, where it's like, no, you're not the mama, you're not the mama, you're not the mama. Like, nobody's the mama, that's the mama. And I need to get to the mama because to be okay. And that's where you see the ego kind of create a sense of individuality. So the way a child develops is within an egoic space, right? Their ego is looking at the world from this certain lens going, am I safe? Am I good? Am I okay? Am I safe? When we've talked about that quite a bit, right? Am I safe? Am I valuable? Am I loved? And it's developing a sense of that it's trying to answer those questions in the most solid way it can. And it's the ego that's doing that. So the first phases of development for a child are ego development. It's an egoic structure that it's all kind of coming through so they can develop a sense of security so that later the deeper parts of us can kind of emerge.
Yeah.
But the ego, for the most part, because we all take so much damage in the first few years, and especially in the sports world, where the kid goes out on the field at 5, 6, 7 years old, and they're already going, I don't think I'm okay. I don't think I'm okay. And then we've talked about that, how trauma develops. Now the ego starts to have to manage that. So the ego starts managing the trauma and trying to answer those questions constantly, not just for the developing child, but for the traumatized parts of that child.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we're not okay. And it develops that story very quickly. Right away, kids will start developing that story. I'm not okay. Competition is painful for most children at that age. And so it's like, I'm clearly not okay. And that's when anxiety starts coming in. That's when there's these, stories, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
That one enters really quick. I'm not good enough and he's not good enough. We were talking about your son, that idea. I'm not going to be one of the best players on the team.
Yep.
That's his ego creating definitions around trauma and around this landscape, this kind of dangerous landscape that he's seeing. And so the ego becomes problematic deeply at that point. And you could say, well, trauma is the actual problem. Yes. Yeah, you're not wrong. Ego is not the problem. But the problem is that the ego takes over with this kind of like barging into the room. I got this.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. I got this. And now we're gonna dominate the space with this constant narrative and story. And that's why anxiety sets in so clearly for so many people at such a young age. So the ego is problematic in that way. But again, we need it. We have to, so the goal is to come to observe it and come into a certain relationship with it over time.
Yeah. And I think as we talk about the developmental stage, right, 0 to 10, 11-ish, 12, there's so much emphasis now on winning at such a young age. And we see that with, travel baseball, travel soccer, gymnastics is another space that you start putting this pressure on kids at such a young age to win and to lose. And there's years of debate over participation trophies, over, how are we really teaching kids to earn, how are we teaching them to achieve, how are we teaching them to fail. I think for parents listening, understand that at some point that stuff enters the space, right? But if the foundation is not built, right, if we don't have that solid sense of identity that I am safe, I am loved, whether we win or lose, and yeah, when we lose, we can learn something from that. But because we have 8-year-olds competing for state championships and there's state rankings attached to that, right? Again, it's a system that's just gotten younger and younger, and a pressure that's being entered into the space for children where a lot of parents want to teach their kids the word grit, right? We talk about that a lot, but not being able to differentiate what stage of this development we're at. And I think that's where, as I observe, and I'm in the space, and so are you, in youth sports, is a lot of parents are just kind of pulled into that energy field that we talked about, where it's like, well, this is the way it is, so this must be the right way. And I think that's something we're, through our works of Hero, Coaches Revolution, the Athlete's Journal, this podcast, right, is giving parents the tools and understanding, right, to give themselves some grace, because the system isn't really set up for success long-term. It is short-term. We can get the trophies, we can get the plaques to hang on our wall and brag to our friends that our kids won the AU, state championship tournament. But it's like, what are we really developing in terms of the child's ego? And then as they're developing out of the developmental stages, right, where do you see, obviously learning to observe the ego, differentiate that your thoughts are different than from who you are, but how would you encourage parents, right, to approach this conversation with their kids and explain in a way that maybe is digestible, right? Or not to explain it to a certain extent because it's just too much information for a kid to handle.
Yeah, I like how you said that at the end. That's a really critical thing, knowing what they can handle, what they can't, because kids in the developmental years, okay, so 0 to 10 and then kind of 0 to 12.
Yeah. Like
right in those years, it's not something they can process that well. But we can teach kids to observe. stories. We can. And okay, of course, parents have to do it within themselves first before they have any understanding of how to do it with a child, right? Yeah. But the idea of approaching it with a kid, is just helping them understand. It's about affirming their emotions, what they're actually feeling. And even with my kids, I'll sometimes go, hey, that thing, it's a dad, I'm good or I'm not good. I constantly tell them, guys, that's just a story we tell ourselves because we want to feel good. I just say all the time, real simple. We tell ourselves we're good or we tell ourselves we're not good because we either feel bad or we want to feel good. I go, but it's just a story. And that's your ego telling you a story, and I just kind of repeat that really simple thing. Just watch that. See the stories, see all those stories. Let's just let them go by. I'll talk about it like traffic. Let it drive by like a car. Watch that story go. There's good. And then, there's you wanting, you want to get that story again, don't you? And I just repeat that over and over again. Don't worry about the story, right? Good or not good is not a thing. I explain that to my kids quite a bit. I keep it very, very simple, right? And it helps them learn to observe it over time. They start to observe it. I can see, especially my son's a little more introspective that way. Yeah. Where my daughter's starting to kind of look at that because she's just starting sports. She's almost 12. She's just starting sports. And so she's kind of looking at it going, who's good, who's not good. And I'm always like, nobody here's good. I tell her all the time we left the other day, she goes, that team was terrible. I go, you guys are all terrible. Yeah. And she goes, why do you say that, Dad? She did that on Saturday. Why do you say that? I go, babe, just because it's just a story. Nobody here's good. I go, the question is, what kind of player would you like to become? Yeah. You want to get better? Yeah. Okay. Then that's just work. And we just put that work in. And the more I kind of do that, she's seeing that. She sees clearly, I don't care whether we're good or not. I have no value in the stories, and therefore it's kind of safe. Yeah. I'm creating a safe space for them. But again, it's about pointing that out. I know, of course, over time, as she gets older, more and more, it's going to be showing her a little more detail, a little more nuance as to what the ego really is. Yeah. Right now, I just let them observe the stories. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And so then how would you define a person who has a big ego? What does that mean in this whole conversation?
That's a funny thing, right? We were raised that way, right? When we were kids, we're like, who's got a big ego? Well, yeah, and some people do have, I would say, more robust egos than others. Yeah. And those are the people I think are meant to do bigger things. Like, it's just like, I always tell people the ego is like a swimming pool. Bigger pool holds more water. Yep. Meaning, if I have a giant coffee mug, that gives structure to the coffee so that I can enjoy the coffee. So a big coffee mug, I can enjoy more coffee, right? That's the idea of what a big ego is. And you'll see that with some people that have this really kind of robust ego. I'm that way. I have a massive ego. And as a result, it takes a lot of work to tame that thing, and to bring it into submission to me, but it also makes me capable of more. Right. Makes me capable of other things. So when you see people with a small ego, then it's still our responsibility to always kind of fill it properly, to live in balance with that thing. Yeah. But people with large egos indicates either one, they're really capable of doing something great, or two, they have so much trauma. There's so much to protect that you can see that ego out in the front. It's just, that guy's got a big ego. That guy's got a lot of pain. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think we do a really good job in the Athletes Journal of helping kind of guide kids in that 13 to 18 range into this idea of what is my ego? How does it work, right? Positively and negatively. And
that's really the central theme of the journal.
Right. Yeah. How can it be used for good? Yeah. How can learning to observe it really benefit us as humans to create the self-awareness? And as you mentioned, I have a large ego too, right? And a lot of that was fueled by my success as a baseball player. A lot of it was fueled by trauma that I experienced on and off the field. But being able to understand when your ego gets triggered, right? Versus when it's maybe just operating in the background, right? Isn't the main operating system that you're using, and learning how to differentiate those moments, right? So how would you explain or ask for parents to say, hey, here's this thing. It looks like your son is stuck in his head right now, right? And that's a term we talk about in the Athletes Journal. How would you define stuck in your head?
Yeah, stuck in your head. So,
or your ego's triggered.
Yeah, your ego's triggered. Well, you can see it like anytime the trauma emerges in the system. Okay. I was watching a high school baseball game on Saturday and watching each kid get up there, especially, and there were some pressure situations. It was really interesting to see like the ego, everybody here's probably heard of fight or flight, right? The concept of fight, flight, or freeze. It's the natural, instinctual caveman level instincts we have to run from danger or to fight to stay alive and this kind of thing. And that's all frontal lobe. That's all ego. The ego's main mandate is to keep us alive and protect us at all costs. And so when, you'll see a lot of athletes, you step up and you can tell they're stuck in their head because they're not able to actually, it's like they're not in their bodies if they're in their heads. and there's no flow to what they're doing. They're not able to analyze and critique. They're not able to make adjustments. You can see it. They're not able to find joy, peace, or happiness. There's a instinctual kind of suffering that's happening.
Yeah.
And so it's like antelopes, versus lions kind of thing. I think we talked about that before, antelopes and lions. The antelopes are very stuck in their heads. They're constantly analyzing not how to make myself better at something, but what's the threat? What's the threat? What's the threat?
Yeah.
So there was quite a few times in the game on Saturday, I could see a kid was up there and he was in his head. And you can see it because he's kind of throwing the bat of the ball. He's not really present. He's not really analyzing the pitcher. He's not really engaging in what he's trying to do out there.
Yeah.
He's just trying to survive the experience of being in the box and being seen that way.
There's no process, right?
Yeah.
It's straight survival.
It's straight survival.
And I look forward as we transition into the next part of this conversation, diving into that flow state, teaching parents how to observe this in their own kids.
Yeah. And of course, the practice for all parents is to observe it within themselves first. And that's what Hero's about. Hero's about getting them on the sideline and start to realize how much of their own survival process is happening on there. That's why I think sports parents, we talk about how toxic the culture is.
Yeah.
I think that we need a new language about that in some ways because it's triggering. It's a triggering experience, which has a gift period inside of it if we can learn to observe ourselves. I was observing my daughter. It was her very first time playing a sports game on Saturday. And she's out there, and I'm just watching myself, and I was observing the intensity of the happiness that I felt.
Yeah.
This very big-hearted kind of, God, I'm so happy. This is so incredible. This is so incredible. And then I was going, man, is this where is it? This is really intense. It was I was just observing it now and getting myself to breathe and see if I could calm down. But it was my ego that was really, really triggered because everything that she was doing and everything that this could mean for her and for me and for everything. I could feel parts of myself really wanting to get attached to every single movement she was making out there. And in the way I observed the most, because I've learned to watch my ego, is my ego could not stop giving coaching points. Could not stop. And I don't even know volleyball that well.
I know.
But it kept on wanting, I had to restrain myself because it kept on wanting to tell her, hey, bend your knees, get low, get ready to receive the ball. I just couldn't do it. I held myself back. I will say that. But man, it was really intense.
That's the observation.
Yeah.
We'll be back more after this.
At whatever level your kids participate in youth sports, you and your kids will benefit greatly from the resources 3A Athletics has carefully created to protect the foundation of your child's identity and your relationship. At the same time, these resources can help you unlock your child's true potential in sports and in life. The sooner you get started, the more successful your kid can be. Resources like Hero, an interactive guidebook taking parents of young athletes on a journey through their own experiences and perspectives, and how to approach the balance between being a loving parent and encouraging your child to push through challenges and excel in their endeavors. 3A Athletics. Awareness, activation, achievement. From good to great. See us at 3athletics.com.
Okay, so helping parents understand the ego being triggered, the term stuck in your head.
Yeah.
What would you encourage parents to look for in themselves? First of all, you talked about your experience and your observation of your own ego during that moment with your daughter.
Yeah.
How would you encourage them to approach their own observation, which we go deep into with Hero, and also noticing when their kid is triggered or their ego is triggered and they're stuck in their head? And what does that look like compared to when they're in the flow state?
Yeah, if you're in the flow state, you recognize that the key isn't to necessarily show the kid how they're stuck in their head as much as it is to draw them into their bodies. Yeah. And we do that by focusing on feeling, because when you ask your kid, how are you feeling? Most of the time, they're just going to respond from their heads, right? They're going to go, I'm good, or I'm not good, or it sucks, or whatever. And you actually, draw them into their bodies as much as you can. So they say, how are you feeling? If I ask my daughter how she's feeling, how are you feeling in your body? You feeling clear? We use that term a lot. In my family, we use clear. Do you feel clear inside, or do you feel uncomfortable? And it draws them into feeling. And that actually helps you actually leave the head.
Right.
The ego can't feel. That's one of those things that just simply can't do it. It can only think feelings. So you ask somebody how you feeling, and they go, I'm good.
Fantastic.
Yeah, doing so great. What's fantastic?
Living the dream.
Yeah, you live in the dream. Which means miserable, right? It's this fascinating thing where if you draw your kid into their body as much as you can, so you go, how are you feeling? Good. Good. They just had 4 strikeouts and you say, how you feeling? Not great. Oh yeah. I said, do you feel clear inside? Are you feeling you're hurting? You draw them into their body. And I said, and eventually they go, I'm fine. Okay. Just saying I can, it's okay if you don't feel great.
Yeah.
And actually help people recognize how they feel. And the more that they direct their attention towards what their body's experiencing, the less they're in their minds. And that's productive. Any attention given to what the body's experiencing is productive and it helps us become aware. And then the idea of observing thought versus observing the body. Now we're switching from that ego operating system to kind of that deeper operating system.
Yeah, which is how we design the Athlete's Journal, right? Is to help kids answer those questions on a weekly basis, right? And saying, what are my thoughts? What are my emotions? What am I feeling in my body? And I love how that, description that you gave, it's getting out of your head and into your body, and then being able to process what is that deeper underlying trauma or issue that's stuck inside of you that's getting triggered every time you don't get a hit, or every time you in coach pitch, you swing and miss at 7 pitches and then you have to hit off the tee.
Right.
And I had a kid on my team tell me the other day, like, I feel like I'm letting the team down. And it's like, no, buddy, you're 7 years old. You're out here, playing baseball in front of 20 or 30 parents cheering, screaming. And it's a scary situation.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be about winning or losing or letting your team down at this stage. There's a point in time where you learn that skill and that just life skill in general, how to be a part of a good team, and you want to pick your teammates up. But it's very difficult, I think, in the culture that sports has become. Yeah. Because I also recognize too, for parents that are listening, you're going to 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 sporting events a week, right? And it's exhausting, and the weather's not great. I mean, we're out there on Saturday, it's like 52 and raining, and it's like most parents are just trying to get through it, right? Instead of recognizing the level of intensity that the kids are feeling in that experience, and how it's very difficult for them to process those emotions, those feelings, those thoughts, because they get out of their body very quickly. Yeah. And we talk about the just play or play experience versus the structure and rigidness that youth sports can create for kids that becomes very uncomfortable. Yeah. I think that's going back to why we encourage that playtime with your child at home, right? In a safe space where you're not coaching them, but you're just playing alongside them, right? And you're letting them drive the bus. They're guiding the experience. And it might be baseball, for example. You don't play outs. You don't play strikes. Yeah. You just play, right? And that's where I've seen it with, my own kids' development, where, one's a little more emotional than the other. And the idea of getting out is the end of the world. Yeah, right. At that stage. And it's like, I had to quickly become aware of why it was never fun to play with him in that situation, because, the older brother wants to get the structure and get the wins and get the strikes. And for the younger one, that feels like life or death. And at some point, he's going to have to learn, right, to deal with failure. But at this stage of his development, it's way more important for him to feel safe, for him to feel loved. Like there's nothing to be gained or nothing to be lost, whether he gets a hit or he has to hit off the tee or whatever it means. Because I see that attachment and how quickly it takes place with kids, because you're also in this space, and parents feel this too, is you're looking around the field, you've got a bunch of 7-year-old kids out there, and you're like, that kid's good, right? It's like, what is good?
Yeah, that's right.
My son grew up hitting off a tee since he was 1 year old. So advancement in terms of skills is going to be different than a kid who didn't have parents who played baseball and stuck a tee on the ground, from 1 year old. And it's like for parents to understand how you can really support your child in that environment, right? In the game situation is being attentive and actually paying attention to your kid and their experience, instead of, again, the habit we all have as parents is we want to video it, we want to get the big hit on film, and we want to share that with our family. Can't be there. So there's a lot of good behind that, but it's also, we're overlooking the opportunity to really observe, like, what are we experiencing and what's our child experiencing, right? And being aware of if the coaches or if the environment is just too stressful for your child at 5, 6, 7 years old. It's okay not to play organized sports, right? It's okay to just focus on some extra time at the park, going to shoot hoops instead of sticking him on the basketball team, because he doesn't feel safe out there, right? And again, we talk about when is that point that you can kind of start to push them through. Well, it's once they develop a foundation of identity and knowing that you're not losing the love. It's not life or death if you win or you lose or you get a hit or hit off the tee.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And it's interesting because when your kid says, I feel like I'm letting my team down, that's the moment where as adults we have to be able to go, That's actually not a feeling.
Yeah.
That's a story that your ego is telling you.
Yeah.
Right? The feeling, how are you feeling in your body? That's different. And that's what you're feeling. It's not easy to get, better at something, to learn and deal with it. That's why I do that with my kids. If I ever hear them say something like that, I feel like I'm letting something down. That's not a feeling. It's just a story, but that's not a real thing. This game is just to get better at these things, to engage in that process has nothing to do with all those stories your ego is telling you.
Well, I think a lot of people listening to this are probably fans of professional sports, right? And we won't name names, but you can watch guys who have great years or have great months. I was guilty of this. 2 months, I was one of the best hitters in our team at 20, 21 years old. And then all of a sudden I hit a rough spot and I'm no longer in my body. I'm stuck in my head, right? Which is the term we use a lot. It's like being able to observe that, you see a guy who signs a massive contract, right? And then now has to go out there on the field and earn everybody's love and respect around the millions or hundreds of millions of dollars that he's being paid to play a sport. Now, again, there's a level when they're professionals, it's a business and it's an achievement-based business. You get paid for production and there's, you got to honor that part of it. But I think the human aspect of this gets lost very easy, right? Because it's just like a guy could be the nicest person in the world, not have this big ego that we talk about, but the ego gets triggered. And then all of a sudden you're watching one of the best players in the league who's swinging at pitches in the other batter's box. You're seeing like, wow, what happened to this guy? And it's like, well, he's a human under the jersey, under the contract, under the accolades. Like there's a human being, right, who has an ego, has this aspect that they're trying to manage and the narratives that the media and everybody around them creates, and they start to internalize. And that was something I've talked about, at length, is how much my ego subscribed to all the narratives, right? And it's difficult when you've never been in a position to Google your name and like actually see what people say and think about you, right? And now with social media, it's more people get that experience than just celebrities or professional athletes because you post stuff and you get likes and you get the dopamine hits and the affirmation that, you are valuable and you are loved, right? And I think we're all still seeking that as adults, but really being able to differentiate the human element to sports, right? Especially at these younger years. And then be able to watch a major league game or a major league soccer game and just say, okay, man, this guy is, you can say it, he's stuck in his head, but like, what is the deeper underlying thing that he needs to work through? And I think again, there's a lot of benefit to being able to overcome failure and learn from those experiences. But a lot of times people don't understand, right, that there is this ego that's really the operating system that we're functioning on a daily basis that isn't giving us the best opportunity to go out and just experience and add value to everybody else around us because we're so consumed by surviving.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. For the parents that are listening, this is the answer to the question around why these midlife crisis spaces hit. Yeah. It's the ego that it just gets to the point it can make you happy. Right. It's just a story.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap this up, we're looking forward to getting into episode 10. Yeah. We'll focus on controlling the controllables, which I think we can all relate to. But again, the ego will be talked about in every one of these.
It is such a central thing to this experience. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us.
At whatever level your kids participate in youth sports, you and your kids will benefit greatly from the resources 3A Athletics has carefully created to protect the foundation of your child's identity and your relationship. At the same time, these resources can help you unlock your child's true potential in sports and in life. The sooner you get started, the more successful your kid can be. Resources like 3A Sports Journals. Many athletes don't journal because they simply don't know how it can be helpful to their process. Elite athletes around the world use journaling from an early age to help them face the tough challenges of sports. If your kids want to go from good to great, they need to learn how to journal. 3A Athletics. Awareness, activation, achievement. From good to great. See us at 3athletics.com.